Hey, so this is gonna be a little bit of a different video than usual. I'm not going to be covering anything specific, any kind of specific topic, but what I wanted to cover today was just generally some things that I've learned from the start of this year. So if you're watching this in the future or whatever, what I mean is from January 2026 to about May 1st, 2nd of 2026. Kind of just an update on where I've been going, what's been going on, and what are the kind of techniques that I've been using, and what kind of things have I been focusing on. And I think this is also an important video to make because apart from just general topics, just me talking about whatever I want, it's good to know like what methodology I'm using and how I'm proceeding and what are my general techniques, just so you can get an overall picture of how I'm using the things that I talk about in my videos in my actual hacking life. So let's get into it. And one of the main things that I wanted to push on was basically what I think about AI now. So I made a video, I think it was this year, maybe it was like end of last year, about AI. And my opinion on it was kind of like, well, it's good. I think AI is good, but I think it's a bit overhyped. And to an extent, I do kind of still agree with them about that take in the video. And a few of the things I said was it's quite expensive, which is still true, especially if you're using the API. And it also is quite overconfident in certain cases where it'll like say it finds a vulnerability, but honestly, it's probably never really an actual vulnerability. And then there was a few issues with it where I wasn't able to get the kind of success off it that a lot of people were describing, and I found that it had problems in a lot of areas. And to an extent, a lot of that still stands. I still believe that it's not going to fully replace bug bounty hunters or anything like that. And the way people are describing them using AI, which is a lot of them just say that they point an AI at a target and then have a hack. This is a way that has literally never worked for me. I have tried so many times to get it to do it. I've done everything that they said, download my bug bounty reports, whatever, and build skills, but I still have just really found no success with this kind of strategy. And it's probably down to the fact that I hack a lot on public bug bounty programs and mostly hardened applications, because those are honestly my favorite because they're the most fun to hack on. And AI doesn't do very well there, but I have had a lot more success with it, especially using Claude Code with a few things that I did. Well, first of all, from the video, I actually have done a lot more learning about AI. So when I posted that original video, I was kind of at like the beginner stage. I have heard a lot about this AI stuff. I did research on it. I had Claude Code running myself, as you saw in the video, and I was using it kind of more basically. But then I did a lot more research into how skills work, how MCP servers work, how you can get Claude to actually do things like go on websites and actually do stuff for you, how you can hook it up with Kaido, which is the proxy that I use, and in general how to like build your Claude MD file and stuff like this. And I did this mostly off podcasts that I heard and basically my own AB experience of dealing with these models. And I started having a lot more success with it in more particular ways, which I'm going to talk about later. But I basically had a lot more success with it like that. And yeah, basically these are kind of the things I did, which is I built infrastructure as well for it. So I just set up like the folder structure or whatever, and I had my VPS running Claude now instead of just running on my computer. So I did a few things to configure it better. I built the Claude MD file and the skills to help it do a little bit better. And then I also learned what it's good at and what it's really bad at. Mainly what it's good at. It's pretty good at static analysis. That's really what AI is quite good at the moment. JavaScript files and stuff like that. And I have had a decent bit of success with just giving it JavaScript files. And there are things that it's less good at. Things that require chaining things or kind of critically thinking is still a little bit limited in my opinion, and I have to guide it a lot for it to actually do things. And also, it's very bad at judging vulnerabilities. It's just still terrible at it. So that's something to keep in mind. Even though you can say in your Claude MD file, focus on impact. Trust me, it won't do anything. It's still it's going to still think that vulnerabilities are some cookie insecure flag or whatever thing that I mentioned in that video, it definitely still holds true. And even on the best models used by Anthropic, 4.7 Opus, or the Sonnet models, this is still a consistent problem in my opinion. But I want to give you kind of a practical guide on how to start using AI yourself, because it has made me a lot of money from being able to leverage AI as a kind of co-hacking partner, having it do things that I can't be arsed to do, which is very nice, and outsourcing a lot of the manual labor to AI, especially with JavaScript files because I hate them, but also other things like building exploits is a very nice thing. Now you have to be careful with this because the Claude API thing decides to block you sometimes, but you can kind of get around it with different kind of languages and stuff, and just general prompt injection. And also you can apply for like this Claude security program thing that will allow you to have less restrictions on Claude, which is something that I've also been using to basically have Claude do more of the security stuff without getting blocked. That's kind of what I wanted to say. So anyway, I have a quick, little start guide to how to use, AI in your bug bounty journey. And this is how I started. So I'm going to tell you how I started using AI. This is not necessarily the best way, and I'm going to talk about a different way in a minute. But the way I started was basically I used OpenRouter together with Claude Code, Claude Code specifically. So I downloaded Claude Code, I set up an OpenRouter account, I put like €30 in there, and then I basically just used this tool called Claude Code Router, which allowed me to use different models apart from just the Anthropic models. So stuff like Sonnet and Opus. I did this because the Sonnet models are very expensive, especially on the API, and I wanted to start with something cheaper. I wanted to start with something that I knew wasn't going to give the best results, but that I could kind of learn how this stuff kind of works first without investing a huge amount of money, because I didn't really see ROI in it at that point because I hadn't really set up a lot of the stuff. I knew that just asking the AI to go hack wasn't going to do anything because surely someone at the company would have already done that. I had to learn how to use it in a way that was different. So that's what I started with. I started with a very cheap model, and that model was Gemini Flash Lite. This model is actually quite good for very, very cheap. I googled a lot of the benchmarks for bug bounty on AI, and this model did surprisingly well. Now, in terms of comparison to more expensive models, for the cost that it has, this model actually punches far above its weight. So I decided to give it a try. I loaded it up into Claude Code Router, and I wanted to use this Gemini model inside of it. And just for reference, this is how much it costs. So it costs $1.5 per million tokens output. So that's the things that it writes, and half and 50 cents for input. Now, just as a comparison on the API, I think Sonnet costs about $15 per million tokens, and I think about $6 for input. And I think Opus is also much higher than that, in the range of 20s for output. So you can see that this model is about 10 times cheaper than the Sonnet models, while being, just, okay, it's not that great, but it's still, a workable AI model that is nice and usable. And when you set this up, what I did was I basically just started customizing and building my Claude Code. So now that I had this cheap model set up, I basically started experimenting. I started building out, the skills. I started building out the Claude MD file, agents, whatever. I started doing all these things and basically getting it to work on an extent that it would, actually be useful to me. And when you get a model like this to work, this Gemini Flash model, it's actually going to be quite easy to get the normal Claude, Sonnet, and Opus models to work because they are, just better in general. So if you have good configuration for the cheap AI, you're also going to have good configuration for the good AI without having to spend money like A/B testing the very expensive AI. So that's kind of what I decided to go with, and I spent a lot of time, basically building these custom files for myself. I experimented with a lot of things. I watched, YouTube videos and podcasts, and then I built out this framework for this cheap AI. I got it to work pretty well actually. I was pretty satisfied with using Gemini, and it was pretty decent at a few things. It's obviously, don't expect great results from this model because of, it's not a frontier model. It's at this point it's very dated, but it was pretty nice for what it was, and it did allow me to get the experience of using AI without draining a huge amount of money, which if you're starting out in bug bounty is probably something that's going to be important for you because you haven't made a huge amount of money. At that point I probably made like 5k or whatever, but I didn't want to drain my bank account with this Claude thing. So I did that, and then once I set up a good foundation base for it and I started seeing more ROI from using AI, I decided to switch to the Claude Code subscription. So I got the max subscription, and from there I was able to find a decent bit of vulnerabilities using AI. Again, I've never found a vulnerability where I've told AI to just hack or do something general and it's came back with vulnerabilities. I've never seen that happen, and even though I've tried doing that, but it never happens. I've only ever found, actually it's probably never actually found like real vulnerabilities, but it has found some leads for me when I've told it to go after something specific that I wanted it to test, so like a specific feature or some gadget that I discovered before and I wanted it to escalate it, and or just it basically does something that I didn't want to do myself, and then it goes does it, and then I have the results. That's really where I've seen the success of AI at the moment. I really have not seen the success of just telling it to go hack something. Maybe I'm using it wrong. Perhaps someone who uses AI better than me will tell me that you actually can do that. But I also think that's very boring, honestly, and I like looking for bugs myself. So I use AI to help me do that, while also keeping in some of the fun and challenge of hacking on a bug bounty program. Because at the end of the day, it's not all about money. If you want money, then you can go be a quant trader or whatever. If you want to have a fun life, I want to be a bug bounty hunter who also still kind of enjoys the challenge of finding bugs, and then still is rewarded with like feeling of dopamine whenever I find something. That's why I've been using Claude the way I have been using, and I've had it working a lot. So I'm gonna keep doing that for now. And if something changes, then I'll update you later on it. And now I want to go into kind of the next section, which is just talking about the new AI features that have coming out on a lot of websites. And I drew this little diagram here just to show you what I kind of think is going on, which is that the faster something is developed, so the less development time is spent on a feature, you can see the amount of security kind of linearly decreases, maybe even exponentially or whatever. But AI features in a lot of platforms are kind of down here. They're kind of in very short development time, and the security is not really that great. Actually, should this be the opposite way around? Actually, wait, I think I might have drawn this graph wrong. Actually, anyway, basically, what I meant to actually show you is that the security for things that are developed very quickly is going to be low. Okay, I think the graph is actually wrong because I think the line should be here then. Anyway, you get the point that the security goes down when things are developed shorter, and these companies have been rushing to push out these AI features. Pretty much every single company is trying to be an AI company now, and that's just causing these kind of not really thought out solutions to these AI problems. AI needs to be sandboxed from prompt injections. It needs to still have user collaboration for a lot of tools. You need to be able to connect MCP servers in a lot of cases now to these AI features, and there has to be interaction with the actual AI for the models. So there has to be limiting there. There's usually like credits or whatever that people can use, like max usage for AI. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong here because there's a lot of like classic web security type of stuff with this feature accessing another API. There's the potential for limit overruns. There's potential for these new prompt injections. You want to ask yourself how what can the AI do, and over time I've seen that these AIs can do more and more and more, particularly without user confirmation anymore, which is something that we're seeing with people running Claude with things like dangerously skip permissions is becoming quite normal. I mean, I even do it. Most people are not sitting there clicking yes every like 30 seconds. Most companies are not going to do that anymore. And it's becoming more normalized that AI can actually make decisions on your behalf now. So instead of asking for confirmation, a lot of the times it seems the culture is shifting to where the AI can actually make decisions on your behalf. So this also does introduce this vector where if you can get prompt injection payloads in, then sometimes you can actually get that integrity impact on the CVSS score as well as just confidentiality, because in a lot of cases the AI is going to be able to make decisions for the client now, just autonomously. And we've also seen more places where we can actually put these prompt injection payloads now. Instead of in my prompt injection video, I talked about the places where the sinks, where it kind of goes into the system prompt, where the AI reads things. Commonly, username were some common things. What else was like, personal details often get piped in, or when the AI searches something on the system, the results of that can also go into the system prompt. But now, we're getting a lot more complicated systems where maybe the AI is processing stuff like images. It's looking at large projects, or it has a lot of in-depth access to the team. And also we have the MCP vector now, with a lot of clients commonly connecting MCP servers, where this is also a vector now, particularly for MCP servers. There's also a thing where if you can add an MCP server actually, and you can specify that it's STDIO, you can actually get RC on the server like by default, because the server tries to activate the MCP server and executes your commands. That's also one interesting way. And we're also seeing these sandboxes for AIs, so these containerized systems where the AI runs on the container and can basically do whatever it wants on it. And I made a series, or I guess it's kind of one video at the moment, about containers, about Docker, which is normally what's used in this case. So it does introduce a lot more vulnerabilities like that. And then the question is, how is authentication, handled? How does the system authenticate the user? And how does it, make sure that you can only access your things? So I've just listed other things. I can go on and on. But basically, what I'm trying to say is AI features are very complicated and they're being pushed out very fast. And not a lot of people are asking, is this safe? So this is why these features have been great, and I've been having a decent bit of success hacking on them lately. And I'm probably going to keep doing that. I'm probably going to make a dedicated video on first how to, set up your Claude Code stuff, how to, build your skills, and how to, get Claude to actually be productive for you. Maybe I'll start off with the open router stuff that I mentioned. Maybe I'll start up with this stuff first and just show you how to set up like a cheaper model first and how to get it to actually be effective. And in terms of hacking AI features, probably does also deserve its own video. Well, it's something that is focused on, and it's something that's I've also kind of developed as a part of this, year's like goals. I made a video last year, kind of reviewing 2025, my bug bounty journey, and I kind of set 3 things that I wanted to focus on for this year, which was to have anchor programs, so programs that I consistently came back to and kept hacking on, basically learning in depth how their systems worked, how each of the features interacts with each other, and how security is generally implemented. Then I also wanted to start hacking on new features more, because I broke down and statistically it was like, I think something around half of the vulnerabilities that I found were on new features. And not including that one random S3 bucket vulnerability that I talked about from Asana, which is disclosed. Then it was like pretty much all of them were actually on new features. So that's something that I noticed, and something that I wanted to kind of focus on more. I was seeing companies pushing out these features where the security wasn't necessarily up to scratch with the rest of the website. It wasn't as hardened, particularly on these public programs, whereas the competition, people say competition is quite high on these public programs because a lot of people are hacking on it. But on these new features, when the company pushes out the new feature, then the security is kind of reset to its base level, right? Because not that many people are going to be taking a look at it at once. Is what I'm kind of saying, right? Whereas these private programs have less hackers, there's less competition, so there's less security. These new features are kind of baseline security, but there's probably someone on the security team looking at it, but there haven't been any like bug bounty hunters interacting with them. So I found that this leaves the door open to these kind of simpler vulnerabilities and these kind of systematic faults as well, which tend to carry very high severity. And that does lead us to the third kind of pinnacle here of the bug bounty, trifecta, I guess you can call it, which is I wanted to focus on higher severity vulnerabilities than usually higher than medium is what I was looking at, so high or critical, because I could see that the ROI and time investment for looking for those vulnerabilities was higher because you were getting paid out more, but it would take longer to find. Well, I kind of noticed that, for these medium vulnerabilities, getting this 500 to 1K bounty range, it wasn't really that worth the time because it would still take like 2-3 weeks to find it, but it would only be, getting me like, 500 to 1K. But these high, the bridge between medium to high is usually quite big. So the high was usually worth like 3 to, anywhere from like 3 to like 7K, for some of the higher paid programs, you know. So it was actually a lot more. It was like 3 to 4 times more, but the time wasn't actually that different. It would take me more like 4 weeks to find, 4 or 5 weeks to find a high. So I kind of did the maths and figured out that maybe if I just focus on the higher severity vulnerabilities, but I sink in more time into the program to go deeper, then I could actually increase the amount of revenue I'm making and also my impact and reputation and stuff like that. So that is the kind of things that I've been working on, and they've been actually doing very well for me. So I actually do recommend this for you as well. This kind of bug bounty trifecta where you're looking at, consistent programs, you're checking what features they're pushing, and you're trying to go for the highest severity possible every single time. That's really been helping me to increase the revenue that I've been making. And I'm sure that if you implement this as well as the other things like AI and the AI stuff, then you can also level up your bug bounty journey as well. And my goal for the end of 2026 is now $100,000. So I mentioned this before, but it was originally 20,000, but I've kind of hit that ages ago at this point. So I wanted to change the goal a little bit and move on to this new goal. So I'm not just sitting there and doing nothing. So I'm about 40% of the way there. So it's currently May 2nd. Yeah, it's currently May 2nd, so we're 4 months in the year. So the third of the year is now gone. So, if it keeps going the way it is, I'm going to make this goal. But in bug bounty, it's you never really know what it's going to be like. Maybe I'm going to not find bugs for the next 4 months, which could realistically happen. Hopefully not though, but we'll see. I'm gonna try and make it to this goal. It is very important that you set a goal for yourself. I think it is very strongly motivating that you have something to work towards every day, and that you're being held accountable for it as well. That you're holding yourself accountable to that goal, and it is going to push you to be better. So another actionable thing: just set a goal. Set a goal for whatever 2026 you want it to be, and you want it to be somewhat realistic, but also somewhat challenging to achieve. So say if you're making, if I, like last year I made 5K, so the next big target was to push that to something like 20K, which was still challenging because it was 4 times the amount I made last year, but it was also realistic because I was taking all of the things that I learned from last year and pushing them on to the next year. So hopefully I was going to naturally be making more because I had previous experience. So that was kind of my logic, and that's kind of what I set this goal for. Now I'm going to set it to 100,000 because I've already made a decent bit of progress towards that. I've shown that I can actually find these critical vulnerabilities and I can actually get rewarded for them. So the next obvious target is to push this $100,000 mark, which is kind of going to mean that I'm a like a full-time hunter. Is keep making like a full-time wage off it. So that's kind of the next goal. We'll see how that goes, and I hope that your goal goes very well as well. And just one last thing is the YouTube community in general. I've been building up this community since last September. This kind of hacking community that we have together. Hopefully improving ourselves. But I want to do a bit more. I'm in college at the moment, so I was doing a bit of exams. But now that it's summer, I'm going to be working more on, providing more content to you guys. I want to add more of the labs to my course at the moment. Some more server side labs, building it out, and basically adding in especially more of those misconfiguration type labs, which are quite hard to host for me on some of my, you know, free labs, because they kind of require these services and stuff like that, which can sometimes be expensive. But I can do it on my paid labs, so stuff about misconfigurations and these kind of third party integrations is what I'm going to be working more in, and then trying to chain some of those vulnerabilities together with some classic traditional web security vulnerabilities in order to create kind of something that you would realistically see in the real world, which is like a misconfiguration, which often requires one more kind of chain to get impact for. And that's kind of what I wanted to implement more, as well as more, in-depth labs. So right now they're kind of being hosted mostly on Python servers with Flask, but I want to move them more into these Docker style containers with multi-service architecture, so I can show vulnerabilities that are more common nowadays, especially with the architecture that companies are using, the secondary path traversal with basically microservices. I also want to experiment with like Node.js prototype pollution and see what I can do with that. And then other type of language or framework specific bugs that I want to showcase. And that's all going to be in my labs. So if you bought my labs, thank you very much for your support and your trust in me. And I am going to update them soon. And then I'm going to be setting a community with some events soon. So basically, a couple of you have asked me, we want to have like a place where we can talk with each other, like a Discord server or whatever. And I'm going to work on that over summer, and I'm going to start building out some events for that, so that we can actually interact together a little bit more. Maybe like live hackalongs or whatever, Q&As and stuff like that. I haven't quite thought about it yet, but I'm sure I'll think of something. And if you have suggestions, leave them in the comments below, and I'm sure I'm going to read them. And then another thing is the labs website. So both the free and normal lab websites probably need a bit of an update, and I'm actually working on that like right now at the moment. So I'm working on that right now, and I'm going to build it out. And the thing I want to change is, as I mentioned before, like right now everything's kind of running on Python and stuff, but I want to switch it to use a virtual machine now instead of just a Docker container, which is just going to be a little bit more secure as well and allow me a bit more flexibility. And so I can do stuff like full RCEs without basically any concern for security, which is going to be good. And then just maybe simplify the login a little bit, and maybe implement like OAuth with the community that I'm going to set up in the future. And then I'm going to switch off Gumroad soon. I'm going to switch to a different platform to sell the course on. So hopefully that's going to be a little bit better. And I'm also going to add video, like me with my video explanations to each of the labs, because I've heard they're a bit confusing. So maybe I'm going to walk through them through a video format instead, and they might be a little bit easier to understand. And all of this should come about May to June. So very soon, in about 1 or 2 months, I'm going to work on all of this stuff, and hopefully some of it will be released by June. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you actually got a little bit of value from it. It's a little bit more of an atypical video for me, where I just talk, on Canva or whatever, and basically do kind of nothing else. But I hope you still got value, and that, it still helped you maybe with some of the methodology that I've recently been using. I'm going to make some new videos about using Claude Code soon, about hacking AI features more in depthly, and I'm also going to start working on the community stuff. So I hope you're excited for that as much as I am. And I'm also preparing the next video for next week already, which is going to be about third-party integrations. It's going to be a hacktivity video about different third-party integrations that have been found to be vulnerable to different kind of access control issues or server-side problems. So stuff like Stripe, Zendesk, and Intercom are the things that I want to focus on, because they're commonly found in a lot of services, and I think it's worth taking a look at it. But yeah, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and happy hunting.